everyone, welcome back to another art time lapse. Today this piece is called Still Growing. Now you can see on this piece I already have like some artwork on it. I just wasn't in a vibe for the original idea that I had for the piece, so I thought I'll just paint over it because I really don't want to waste the watercolor paper. But I thought that I'll do like a green shade, kind of like a natural color scheme. So we'll see what it turns out to be. Because I already painted something on this art piece before, I knew I had to do something that's a little bit more pigmented, a little bit darker, to cover up some of the designs that was already there previously. And that's one of the great things about gouache, because of how opaque it is. You can kind of paint and overlap previous layers, kind of like acrylics, and you can just go over your mistakes, and I really love that. You can see I actually used quite a bit of water with my piece to kind of simulate the watercolor effect, and I really like that property of gouache specifically. So the piece I mentioned I'm doing today is called Still Growing. My idea is, again, nature theme, and I also want these like little characters inside the painting to like kind of perpetuate the idea that reflect how like small we are as humans compared to rest of nature, which covers a majority of the piece here. And there will be, imagine like a parent, an older sibling, like a older character holding the hand of a younger character, and the younger character is kind of pointing into these mushrooms or like flowers that I'm gonna have in this piece. A lot of this piece I would say draws from experience that I have with my own children. Right now I have two little ones. They're toddlers. I call them toddlers, but they call themselves big kids. And they always ask why, and they're so curious about nature, and I love that so much. And I hope that hopefully I will kind of catch on some of that contagious curiosity that they have and still grow just like they are still growing. So lately we've been reading a lot of books about nature and like animals. They'll be asked like, why don't fish blink? Do fish poop? Or like how come turtles will lay eggs? Or do whales have eggs? How big are those eggs? And those are all questions that I have been like very intrigued by, that like, what made you ask a question like that is totally random while we're having in the middle of dinner. And I love the idea of that. And when we go over to the park, they'll ask all these questions. They'll see all of these animals and grass and like flowers and trees, and like they'll be so intrigued by it. And sometimes like my son in particular will bring up like, talk to me and say that, Mom, we are so lucky. And I'm like, I need to have more gratitude and about just everything that we have exposure to, and we're so lucky to have the ability to kind of indulge in nature. So that's where this piece comes from. It's a little bit long-winded for my explanation, but like I thought the context was important for you to appreciate this piece. So you can see there's like these round figures that I have. They're actually supposed to be like mushrooms or like trees and such, and maybe like little flowers. They're not meant to be boulders, but I really love the contrast of the really highlight pigmented turquoise that's on top of like the duller deep greens that you see. And in here I also wanted like the little flowers or like mushrooms that would sprout out from the side. Right now I'm just using a lot of like turquoise to highlight where these would be, but later on my plan is to add on a little bit of like maybe daisy colored yellows and some lilac colors, because I think it's nice to have a little bit of variety to make it a little bit interesting rather than just like a solid green piece. Here you see, just speeding things up, you notice the colors are a little bit different for this piece, and that's because when gouache dries, the darker colors tend to dry a little bit lighter, and the lighter colors tend to dry a little bit darker. So that's why the colors look a little bit different as I'm painting, because as it dries the colors look slightly different. And that's why I'm going back and using a darker gouache to paint in some of the shadows, because they didn't dry as dark as I would like. In some incidents I will probably use mixed media, including like color pencils, to kind of fill in some of the darker shades if I don't get the exact color I want. I don't know if I see this potentially as a disadvantage for the gouache medium itself, because it doesn't necessarily dry or paint. It doesn't dry the exact color that I would imagine it to be. So when you're done drawing, like, it might not be the exact color scheme that you were aiming for. And I find that for this, I just have to, the way I ramify that is to let it dry a little bit and then add on the darker layers later. Because if you just keep working on that same layer while it is still wet, it tends to blend in with your previous details that you've added, which is such a shame, because then you lose out on a lot of the background that you had spent time doing. So here, doing some looser brush strokes for the ground. I really like the texture of that. Just zooming in to show you the process of how I painted. Here I'm using a round brush to kind of draw these mini mushrooms. I quickly realized that the round brush wasn't a great option to do details like this, so I opt for a smaller brush. And you can see here, just like so much easier to paint the stems of some of these flowers and mushroom and leaves that come out, rather than trying to fidget with the round brush. Here I'm just continuing to add on more mushrooms that kind of sprout from everywhere. This part was actually very therapeutic for me. I really enjoyed it because there's like a lot of randomness to it. There's no like wrong answer, so I kind of like that. So here you can see I'm adding the stems in, and it's just coming out so nicely. I like how delicate it is with all the mini stems that extend from each of the mushrooms. And I'll have to focus a little bit more on the characters later after I finish the background. So I always work from the background to the foreground when I'm using gouache. That way you can kind of layer things and like plan a little bit better, knowing that that is the routine you would use for a gouache medium such as this. Here you can see I'm using some of the lilac purples and have some mushrooms in turquoise and yellow. Just makes such a difference using different shades of colors and having a color scheme plan ahead of time. So yeah, I think this piece, I wasn't sure exactly how it will turn out, but I think it's okay. There's a little bit of a glow of yellow that is resonating from the bottom, from the ground up, so you can see it's reflected off some of the mushroom and some of the plantation that's there. I love how a glow is not just solid white. There's like different shades of glow as like the light reflects off other pieces of plants in this painting. And here you can see the little characters that I have, and then I have little leaves that are stemming off the top of their heads because they are still growing. And there's a little one pointing out into the world to show the larger one, hey, look that really cool thing over there. It's still growing and we're growing, and I just love the idea of it, to reflect and like accept that like we are constantly growing and learning new things. So this is the final piece of Still Growing. Thank you so much for joining me on this art time lapse. This was such a wonderful, beautiful piece to paint. I hope you enjoy the process of it. And here I just want to show you some of the details I wasn't able to fully capture in the full video of this piece, Still Growing. Well, that's it for now. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time in another video. Stay safe and stay creative, everyone. Bye for now.